Good morning, Safi, and welcome to SED Talks, the Safi Employee Development Talks, the one and only podcast brought to you on Safi Time. I am, as always, your host, Robert Smith, and today we're going to talk about successful foster families. Our TFC folks out there are always scrambling around looking for those good quality families to help us provide the services that are needed for our foster youth. To do that talk, I am bringing in a very special guest, a dear friend of mine for many, many years. We go way back. Kelly Davis, our Chief of Organizational Development and Research here at the OD&R department, or as I affectionately call her, the doctor. And she'll get into that here in just a little bit. But Kelly, welcome to the podcast. And if you would, just kind of introduce yourselves to the Safi peeps.
Great. Thank you so much, Robert. I'm really excited to be talking with you today. I started my Safi career in 2008 in our Sydney division, and that is actually where you and I met. So
Yes.
We go way back.
The great Sydney division. Shout out to Sydney.
Yes, the shout out to our folks in Sydney. So that is really where I started working with treatment foster care. I'd spent most of my career primarily working in mental health settings, and I started my career in Sydney with treatment foster care, and I was in that role for 5 years. I was from 2008 to 2013. I was the assistant state director in Ohio for about a year, which was really great, and I was able to kind of work with some different divisions. I worked with the Sydney division, Dayton, Cincinnati, Safi Behavioral Health, and our intake department. So it was great to work with those folks as well. And then in 2014, the decision was made to reorganize our training department and pull all of our outcome measurement into our employee development activities so that we could use a data-driven approach to our employee development activities. And so I moved into the director of, well, at the time we called it clinical advancement and outcome measurement. So if you think organizational development and research is long. So I was the director of clinical advancement and outcome measurement. And then in 2015, the department expanded again, and we included the risk assessors, Sandy Ellis and her team, into the department. And so we expanded again, and that's when we have the organizational development and research department as it exists today. So I've been with Safi for about 9 years, and it's been great. It's really wonderful. I love working here.
Well, we love you working here too, and thank you for all that that you've done for us. But just real quick, just so everybody knows, so we're not just the training department.
Right. We are not just the training department.
It goes far and beyond that. We do more than that.
Absolutely. And that was really the rationale behind reorganizing and restructuring the department, is that employee development and developing our employees and engaging our employees goes way beyond just training. And we felt like we could be doing so much more for our folks out in Safi land, and that rationale to pull our risk management and our outcome measurement and all of those different things into the department so that we could really be making informed decisions about where we need to concentrate our development efforts. So really, it is much more than just a training department, correct?
Sure, absolutely. One of the career milestones I noticed that you left off, we'll touch on, is you recently received your doctorate.
Yes, I did. When I started with Safi in 2008, I was a doctoral student at Case Western Reserve University. I was finishing up my coursework at that point in time. And I finished my PhD my PhD is in social welfare. I finished in October of 2006. No, not October, excuse me. August of 2016. And it took me just over 10 years to finish the program. I started in June 2006 and finished in August of 2016. So it was not a short process, but it was definitely well worth it.
Well, definitely a long fought victory on that one. The reason I bring that up is because if correct me if I'm wrong, the topic we're going to talk about today, that's actually what you used for your doctorate presentation.
Correct, correct. So my dissertation research focused on successful treatment foster families. And so I spent a many years kind of immersing myself in literature and then carrying out a research project about successful treatment foster families. And so, yes, that was my dissertation research.
Awesome, awesome. And tell me, so since social work is such a broad topic and it covers so many different areas, what was it that really drew you to this one? What made you choose this one as your topic to present?
So, when I was the treatment director in Sydney, one of the things that I did is I worked closely with Melissa, Chad, and Mary Jude in the intake department
Shout out to
to
intake.
find good. Yeah, shout out to intake. So I worked with that very, very wonderful team of people to help match youth with foster homes, with treatment foster homes. And so I spent a lot of time talking with Melissa, Chad, and Mary Jude and looking at referrals and making recommendations about homes that I felt like might be a good match. And one of the things that I started noticing was that there were some families that could really manage anything, any behavior, any issue, any age, so it really didn't matter. And they could manage those youth and they could be successful with those youth.
Sure.
And there were some families that really had a very difficult time maintaining placements. There were some families that, we ended up kind of deciding not to really utilize all that much because they had very high rates of disruption.
Sure.
That disruption is very difficult for foster youth. And so I couldn't really find a rhyme or reason to what was working and what wasn't. So you could have two families that looked very similar on paper, and one would be one would be successful and one wouldn't. Or there would be situations where you thought a family would be great. They're going through the licensure process and you think, oh, well, these people look like they might be a really, really great family. And then they get a placement and it wouldn't work out, or they get multiple placements and it wouldn't work out. And then there were cases where we would license a family and I would be a little reluctant. I think one that I remember very distinctly is we were licensing a family, a very young couple. And when I say very young, I'm talking, I think they were just old enough to be foster parents. And I'm thinking, like, how are we going to use this family? And they ended up being absolutely a phenomenal family. They ended up, we took a chance on them and they ended up taking a difficult placement and they did very, very, very well. So, and they didn't have parenting experience. So, so we had people that were very experienced parents and very knowledgeable about parenting and, and that maybe weren't doing such a great job. And then we would have young couples that would come in and maybe they had the stuff that made it work. So I was very intrigued by what was going on there. Why is this the case? And so being the good doctoral student that I was at the point in time, I looked to the literature and tried to figure out, what was going on here. So I looked to see, one, what does the literature say, the existing research say about treatment foster care? And then two, is there anything out there that can help us determine what's going on with successful families and what's going on with families who aren't successful, so that we could make better placement decisions, that we make better recruitment decisions, and that we could better serve the children in treatment foster care. Because let's face it, the kids that we serve in treatment foster care are some of the most vulnerable children in the child welfare system.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's really, right. And it's really critical that as practitioners that we do not re-traumatize children by having them bounce from home to home or put them in homes that aren't a good fit for them. So when I looked at the literature, what I found was there was very little about success in foster care and almost nothing about success in treatment foster care. The existing literature is very deficit focused, so it really looks a lot at what goes wrong. It looks a lot at why do placements disrupt. And it also is very heavily focused on the child. And so there really wasn't anything about, there wasn't a lot out there about the families. And what I really came to believe was that it wasn't about the child. It didn't matter that the child had this behavior or that behavior, or they had this diagnosis or that diagnosis, or they were 15 or they were 5. I really came to think that it was much more about the family. And so when I realized that there wasn't all that much out there, that's when I got really intrigued about about this topic, and was there a way that I could carry out a research project that would help me gain a better understanding of what might be going on with our successful families, so that we as an agency, one is about my own curiosity, but, so that we as an agency really could make better decisions, and we could be more targeted with our recruitment and development efforts. So I know it's a very long explanation.
No, a very good one though, and I can kind of echo what you say from a foster parent standpoint. And those of you that know me knew that me and my wife, we were actually foster parents with Safi in the Sydney division. Shout out Sydney. During that time frame, and we're talking 5 or 6 years ago when this was going on, the attitude was very different in regards to training. I can tell you that as a foster parent, it was very frustrating that I had a lot of professionals that could tell me what labels this child had, what behaviors this child had, and provide quote unquote trainings that really didn't have any substance on how to handle those things and what I was supposed to do as a foster parent. I had the added advantage that my wife is a caseworker at the time. So I at least had that crutch to where I could get a little bit of background behind the scenes. But a foster family that was coming in off the streets with little to no clinical background, that just wanted to do good and be a foster family, they were really kind of left high and dry. And that was considered the norm. So to see that there's people in the field that were recognizing that and going above and beyond and trying to find a fix for that to where we can properly train the foster parents, that was exciting when I heard that. I kind of wish that we had that back then, but at least going forward, we're going to have more strides towards that as an organization. But yeah, as a foster family, I can echo those sentiments. Those trainings that we had back in the day were not. They just weren't very good. But in you doing your research and in your project, you found certain things that were kind of correlating towards what a successful family was. And I think you broke it down into 3 findings.
Yes. So what, would you like me to give a little bit of background on the research project itself,
Absolutely.
Robert, or do you want me to jump right into the findings?
I am sure our audience is riveted. Go for it.
Okay, all right. I'm not going to get overly technical with this, but I would like to give, for there are some people out there that are interested in research. So just to talk a little bit about the project and kind of the rationale behind it. So first and foremost, those folks who have known me during my whole career with Safi know that the research project that I ended up carrying out was not the research project that I started with. So I had several different design changes to my research project, ran into a lot of barriers along the way, and that's one of the reasons that it took me so long. But where I ended up landing is I landed on a research project that uses a methodology called concept mapping. And concept mapping is a mixed methods approach, which means that you have both quantitative data and qualitative data. And really what happens with concept mapping is the reason it's a mixed method approach is you're essentially collecting qualitative data and treating it like it's quantitative data, doing essentially analysis that's similar to what you would do with quantitative data.
Sure.
And what happens during this process is that you have your participants generate ideas about a particular topic. And then once the ideas are generated, you have your participants state the relationship between those ideas. And what they do is they sort the ideas into groups that make sense to them conceptually. And then the data are analyzed, and the results end up being a visual representation of the data. So you end up with a diagram or a picture that is a visual representation of the participants' conceptualization about a particular topic.
Sure.
So with my project, I really set out to answer a couple of different questions. First, I wanted to know how professionals who provide support to treatment foster families conceptualize successful treatment foster families. When I say professionals, I'm talking about our case coordinators, or what we used to call our FYSs. And then I wanted to know, what do professionals providing support to treatment foster families identify as family factors that are most important for placement success? So I really wanted to focus on professionals, focus on our case coordinators, because they bring an incredibly valuable perspective to the topic. So all of our case coordinators have an educational background. Many of them are licensed. So we generally have people who have at least a bachelor's degree, if not a master's degree. They have licensure in many cases. And so you have people who have they have an educational background. They get continuing education to support their development in their roles. And one of the really interesting things about this group of people is that professionals, our case coordinators, they see a lot of families and they see a lot of placements. And so they've got this great combination of education, experience, ongoing training, and contact with multiple families. So they have the opportunities to see a variety of placements, and they see what works and what doesn't. So case coordinators who are participating, who agreed to participate in my project, and I should have said this long before now, thank you to everyone who supported my research, because there were a lot of different people who supported the project in a lot of different ways. And I would like to say thank you to all of them. And I'd like to say a special thank you to the case coordinators who took time out of their incredibly busy schedules to log on and participate in my research project. So I would not be having this discussion with you today if it were not for the case coordinators who agreed to participate in the project. So a special shout out to those folks. But what we did was we asked them to respond to what's called a focus prompt, and we presented them with a statement. It's something that contributes to treatment foster placement being successful in a family is. We just asked them to generate brainstorm ideas about that. Then they organized those ideas, and then we ended up with a concept map, which was the visual representation of how our professionals view treatment foster care placement success. And so at the end, there were 5 clusters, and essentially that's kind of 5, factors, if you will, that go into a successful treatment foster placement. And those things are foster youth needs, optimal environment, foster parent support needs, foster parent required qualities, and effective parenting skills. I think, so now that I've kind of given all of that background there, sure. I think, Robert, I think your original question was essentially like, what does all of that mean? So,
sure. And even if I could jump in for a second, for those out there that don't do research, let me just state how difficult that whole process has to have been. To make a qualitative, as you said, which is, for those out there that don't know, it's words, it's feelings, it's opinions. It's not cold hard data of numbers, which is your quantitative research, which is much easier to put in clusters. You're literally sifting through people's opinions and interpretations of a word and trying to make them match up with somebody else's.
Right. And one of the great things about concept mapping is that there's a really nice software program that you can use for your data collection and analysis that really helps with that analysis process. And but right, so when you have the qualitative data and you're collecting people's ideas, with the concept mapping process, it goes through kind of a structured and organized set of steps to really figure out how all of these ideas are related and group them into concepts that are representative of similar things. So when I did the research project, we had 87 statements that were generated. So that focus prompt that I mentioned, something that makes a placement successful in a treatment foster family is. So there were 87 unique ideas that were gathered or generated about that particular question, and then that information was taken through that set of structured steps. And at the end, we had that concept map that let us know that there were 5 things that the people who participated in this study saw as really critical to, or 5 areas that were critical to treatment foster placement success.
Sure. So yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt on that, but I just want to make sure people appreciate just what actually went into that and the amount of detail and sifting through that took. So mad props to you for that one. But please continue.
Oh, okay. So if now's a good time, I can kind of jump into what does all of that mean? Kind of what is the interpretation of that? Okay, great. So one of the things that we learned from this is that effective parenting skills are really, really critical. That the foster families having good parenting skills is really important to making a placement work. And what we kind of interpreted from the results of this study is that being a successful treatment foster family requires a combination of essentially 3 different skills: flexibility, cohesion, and structure. So the flexibility is important because you are integrating when a treatment foster placement happens, that youth has to be integrated into that family. So the family has to be flexible enough to allow other people to come into that family. So one of the things that kind of goes along with that flexibility, and one of the professionals that participated in the study, one of the case coordinators, one of the things that he or she said was that it was important for foster parents to understand that parental approach with foster children may be different than how the foster parents raised their own child. So they've got to have the flexibility to integrate that child into the family. And they also have to have a flexible approach to their parenting so that, because I mean, this coordinator is, hits on something really important. Yeah, the way that somebody raised their own children, what you end up needing to do to parent a treatment foster youth may be very different. So that's a flexibility piece. The cohesion is important because you have to have a family that is cohesive enough to have the child feel like a part of the family. That's really important. And there has to be the ability to make an emotional connection with the child and the emotional connection, with all of the members of the family. So along those lines, one of the things that one of the case coordinators said was that it's important that the foster parent recognizes the importance of establishing a positive and trusting relationship with a foster child first before expecting anything in return from the foster child. So that emotional connection and taking the time to establish that positive and trusting relationship is really critical. And then finally, that structure piece. The structure piece is really critical because there has to be clear expectations and consistency. So foster youth really need to know concretely what is expected of them. They need to know that there are rewards for meeting expectations and that there are consequences if they don't meet the expectations or they violate family rules. So it's really kind of this delicate balance of flexibility, cohesion, and structure, which isn't necessarily it's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to accomplish.
Absolutely not.
But those things are really critical.
Sure. And again, as a foster parent, I can attest to just how not easy that is. Flexibility wise, just the from like limitations of what you're allowed to do parenting wise with a foster youth. That's one shackle that you kind of have with that, but just the fact that one style of parenting doesn't fit all, even in regards to foster youth. So it's not even just the dichotomy of your biological kids, how you parent them, and how you parent the foster youth. It's just a matter of what's effective for each individual child. With my four biological children, we can't do the same things for each of them because each of them react differently to different methods, and you have to approach it differently. So, just in general parenting, that's always a good tool set to have in your bag. Structure wise, I know one of the big things that we always did was as soon as we had a placement, we would go over what we called the house rules. And that was just the non-negotiables, the things that we didn't allow. So your curfew is this. We have chores that are done in the house. They're done on these days. We have dinner at this time. You can eat what we make, or you can have this as an alternative. Things like that. Just the little things that you may not necessarily think of to let people know, but having that clear set of instructions took away a lot of the confusion. And sometimes it would prevent the foster youth from getting in trouble by mistake. They don't know what they don't know. So if you don't clearly set the expectation, you don't clearly explain how things are done, they could accidentally do something incorrectly, not knowing that it was a rule, and get in trouble. And that just puts you behind the eight ball in regards to building their trust and having them be accepting of your home. Well, if I can do absolutely nothing and get in trouble, why would I bother, putting effort into this? So just setting those clear expectations we found was really beneficial to getting them to kind of accept the household and start to become part of the household in themselves. They became part of the team essentially.
I think that that's a really great point, Robert, and that establishing all of that up front is a super smart thing to do. And I think you're right. If those expectations aren't clear and something happens and the child kind of, like you said, accidentally gets in trouble, sure, then it really does undermine your ability to establish a relationship with the child.
Sure, absolutely. It's what we found with almost all of our placements. It was one of the key things. So, all you out there, take notes. We're giving you some gems today. And one of the big things that we had to understand, especially with the population that we dealt with, was, and this is just kind of in general with foster care, is all of them have received some sort of trauma in their life. It may not be something as severe as some of the populations out there, but just the sheer fact that they're in foster care means that they are experiencing trauma. They're away from their family.
Right.
What would you say, other than, and it has a very clear note on here that really struck a chord with me when I was reading, is not to take it personally as a family. Could you speak on that a little bit, on what should a family expect, and what is the benefit of making sure that you're not taking that personally?
Right. So I think that piece of trauma relates to actually two other of the key findings of the study. And this ability to not take things personally relates to kind of the second major finding of the study. And that is that there are certain qualities that lend themselves to being a successful treatment foster parent. And that ability to not take things personally is something that was identified as really important. And then some of the other qualities that really facilitate the ability to be successful is the foster parents having open communication skills, be able to communicate honestly. They're good listeners. Emotional stability was something that came up, that having a family treatment foster parents who are emotionally stable was really critical. And that, again, that understanding of the impact of trauma and the ability to understand that it's not personal really lends itself to being successful. And in addition to those types of things like the communication and good listening skills and being emotionally stable, some of the other things that came up that were not surprising, but I found were interesting, were things like it's important for foster parents to be empathetic. And I think that speaks to the trauma piece as well, that empathy for the trauma that the child has experienced. Openness is really important. Being non-judgmental is very important. Being kind and understanding. Those were all things that lend themselves to being a successful treatment foster parent. But that kind of empathy for children who have experienced trauma, that understanding, that openness and being non-judgmental about the behaviors, and then again, like you said, that not taking things personally, because no matter how personal it feels, it's not. So that's something that's really critical.
Sure, and it like you said, you can't take it personally because, quite simply, even if they are personally attacking you, they may not even realize what they're doing or what's causing the basis. But I guarantee you are probably not the cause. It's just something stemming from the experiences that they've had, the trauma that they've experienced, and being there for them and showing that you understand that and that you're still going to be there at the end of that. That's where the real bonds in foster care happen. That's where the connection and the relationship, that's where that's going to start. That's the foundation for that, is making sure that they know no matter how much I'm acting out, that at the end of it, you're still going to be there. And that's definitely a quality of a good foster family, is making sure that you're going to be there through that.
Right. That commitment is so critical.
Speaking again from personal experience, you can't take it personally. I did in the beginning. I didn't fully understand that going in. It was through a lot of talking and going through it with my wife that I kind of understood. Oh yeah, this is why this is happening. It really has nothing to do with me. And if you don't do that, you do face a little bit of burnout, and you do face a little bit of questioning whether you're in it for the right cause, or that you can maintain that. If you get through it, I guarantee you it gets better. But that burnout is definitely something that looms over the heads of foster parents, and a lot of that has to do with just the added stress that foster care adds to the family dynamic. And I know in your piece you talk specifically of finding that support system and ways of dealing with stress.
Right. So the support network was really kind of the third key finding, or the third key takeaway from the study. And one of the things so when you carry out a research project like this, particularly if you're doing it for dissertation research purposes, you have to have kind of a theoretical orientation and look at the topic from kind of your research has to have some kind of theory or theoretical orientation to it. And one of the things that I looked at as far as theory is concerned is family stress and coping models. And there is a very large body of existing research about how families deal with stress. And this research indicates, and this is stress in any family, that the initial research in this particular kind of field or around this theoretical orientation took place during World War II with families who were separated because of the military service related to the war. And so this research stretches back quite some time. And it's shown time and time again that when families have adequate support, that it helps to moderate the impact of stress on the family. And so one of the things that did come out of this research that was very interesting to me, because I think it was in line with the existing research on stress and how it impacts families, is that support is really critical. And so the families, the treatment foster families, they need support from us. From the treatment team, from the agency. And from us, they need things like information about the child. They need things like somebody to help facilitate the relationship building early in that placement. So we talked a little bit about the importance of being able to integrate the child into the family. And one of the things that we can do as treatment team members is to help facilitate that process. They need help resolving problems. From us as well, from the treatment team, foster parents need development opportunities that are relevant and that speak to the needs of the child and that help them develop a strong foundational understanding of trauma and its impact. So Robert, you mentioned that when you were when you and Jessica were foster parents, that the training was kind of hit or miss, and it was not particularly effective because there would be, the information was really quite general and, it wasn't necessarily focused.
Very, very broad,
right.
very vague.
Right. And so one of the things that we found in this study, and one of the staff that participated in the study said that it is critical for foster parents to have training that is very targeted and specific to the needs of the child. So that support from us is critical. They need knowledge, they need information, they need development opportunities. They need somebody to walk alongside of them and help them integrate the child into the family, help them resolve problems. And so, there's a lot of things that we can do to support treatment foster families. And another piece of that support, the treatment foster families don't just need support from us, they also need support from informal support networks, like their own family, from friends. And I think one place that is really critical is having other foster families to connect with and get support from. I think anybody who has had a unique experience in their life, and I think that this can be any kind of very unique experience. And I would imagine, and now I am speaking as not a foster parent, but I would imagine that there are things that are incredibly unique and specific to being a foster family that only other foster parents are going to be able to understand. Sure. So that connection with other foster families, I don't know, you were a foster parent, Robert. No, do you think that's
absolutely.
true?
Absolutely. Just in like the, back when we did the foster parent conferences, and then we actually had the support group back when the Lima division was around, even just spending an hour trading war stories. It was kind of gallows humor at some points, but just to be able to share that story and know that somebody else had probably had something similar or worse or whatever, it gave us a nice feeling to kind of just de-stress, because like you said, if I told that story to somebody on the street, one, they're not going to appreciate it fully because they haven't experienced it, but two, they're not going to understand why we do foster care in some instances.
Right.
So just to have somebody that you can share that with, and it kind of goes into like the soldiers of, we've been through this. This is what we've done, and this is what we experienced. Unless you've been there, it doesn't really have the full impact. So just having a couple families go out to dinner and just, like I said, just talk things through, because they've been there, they've understood that, and in some instances, we're not allowed to say what we've been through in some of those things, so they can at least relate in those instances. But yeah, definitely hugely helpful. And just in your family aspect, you mentioned on that, having that strong understanding that we're doing foster care, and this is why we're doing foster care, and incorporating them into the scene. That's where that strong foundation is going to be, to where that united front, that cohesion that you spoke to, that's where that's going to come from, is letting everybody know what's going on. This is why we do foster care. This is what we're doing in foster care. This is what's happening in foster care. It takes away a lot of, one, that negative stigma that may follow it, but two, lets them kind of get on board and realize that it's a normal situation. They're going to help their family out. So definitely a huge asset.
So yes, definitely. So to just kind of like pull those kind of three findings, key findings together. We've got the parenting skills and the way that a family parents, the qualities that they have as a family, and then that support and the availability to support the treatment foster families. Those were the most critical factors that our case coordinators who participated in the study saw as contributing factors to success in treatment foster care. So the combination of all of those things is really critical, and it can increase the likelihood of stress, or it's not stress, excuse me, of success. Right, no, not stress.
So you've identified the things that makes it a successful foster family. Do those people exist? Where do we find them? What leads us in the direction to find a family that can fit all those qualities?
So that's a really great question, Robert. And I think that's, I think some of that is stuff that we're still figuring out. But I think that there are some things that we can do. And I think that there are some things that we are doing as an agency that are really going to help us in this particular realm. So, we know what it is that we need to look for in a family. Mm-hmm. So that's good. And one of the things so I guess I'm going to pause here and just kind of give like a disclaimer. We're talking about one research study, and it was a relatively small study, and my research is in no way like the end all be all authority on successful treatment foster families. But one of the things that I would like to mention at this point in time is that, I talked about, when we first started our conversation, Robert, I talked about how we don't really know much about successful treatment foster families. There is a small body of research on success in traditional foster care. And and we know that there are similarities. But I mean, so being a foster parent, like a traditional foster parent and treatment foster parents, there's certainly commonalities there. But there are some unique and specific things about being a treatment foster parent. And so there is a small body of literature out there on success with traditional foster families. And many of the findings that we that came out of the study that we did here at SAFI are consistent with findings of research on successful traditional foster families. So there was some differences, but there were also a lot of things that were consistent with that. So as I talk about the practice implications and we talk about things like where do we find these families, I would like to give a disclaimer that yes, this was a small study. It's certainly not the end all be all, but there are things that are consistent with existing literature and existing research on traditional foster families that I think kind of lend itself to backing this up. So we never want to go running down a particular road just because there's one study that says that it's, this is a good thing to do. We need lots of different studies. And so, like I said, we've got some traditional foster family research that does support some of the findings of this. So I guess I will throw that disclaimer out before I jump into it.
As a disclaimer to your disclaimer, give yourself some credit as well. I mean, your project may be just one research, but one, it makes sense. I would argue that it's hard to argue that these findings don't make sense. Like, why wouldn't we be looking for foster families that have these qualities? Mm-hmm. But I appreciate you for mentioning that it is also data driven. It's not just that it makes sense. There are existing studies out there that back this up. There's a reason it makes sense because it works. with the data.
Right.
So a disclaimer to your disclaimer, but go ahead.
Okay. So to kind of speak to some of these qualities and the parenting skills and those types of support, how do we find these families, and what do we look for? So we know these things: the flexibility, the cohesion, the structure, compassion, stability, being non-judgmental, having a good support network, having good communication skills, all of those types of things. So one of the things that we're doing at SAFI right now that I'm sure that anybody listening to this podcast probably has heard a little bit about is as part of our treatment foster care model, we are implementing the Safe Home Study in all of our states. We have many states that are using the Safe Home Study already, but we are implementing it in the states where we are not. So the Safe Home Study is the structured analysis family evaluation. And the Safe Home Study assesses for many of these things that are really important to a treatment foster family. So it assesses things like the flexibility of the family and the cohesion of the family. It assesses for support and all of these different things. And I'm speaking to this having not, I will, another disclaimer, I have not been trained in the Safe Home Study assessment, but I have done some reading about it, and Ryan out in Colorado was kind enough to let me borrow some of her materials that she got in the training that allowed me to take a closer look at it. And so many of the things that we want to see in our foster families is assessed in the Safe Home Study assessment. So I think going down that road is really a great thing to do, and I'm super excited about that. So the assessment piece is really critical. Conducting a strong, thorough assessment to see how the family is functioning and see where their strengths and growth areas lie are really important. And that's not to say that we decide like, oh, well, this family doesn't have, this critical skills. So the assessment is about, determining how good of a fit they are going to be for treatment foster care, but then also it helps guide our development plan of our foster families. So that Safe Home Study assessment, I think, is really exciting because it's going to allow us to assess many of those qualities that we're looking for.
Well, very cool. I mean, that kind of goes along lines with the proactive recruitment that we talked with Heather, where that's going to give us the nice tools to where we can get our future foster families and make sure that they are where they need to be on that. For our existing foster families, that doesn't mean they're left out in the dark. We're obviously going to use that to further their development and kind of go down that road, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And, I think that I wanted to mention the Safe Home Study assessment because I think it's a really positive step that we are taking as an agency. And so, but there are many other things that we can do in terms of our recruitment and our development and our retention efforts. So, some of the other things that I think we can kind of look out for as we are recruiting families is, so we want families who are flexible. We want families who can integrate other people into their families. We want, families who are compassionate and kind and all of these things. So, how do we know that families have these things? Or, so we've got the assessment piece. We can look at other things like evidence in the family as we were conducting, our assessment of the family. Is there anything that lends itself or provides some evidence that a particular family has the qualities and skills and abilities needed to be a successful treatment foster family? So let's say you're working with a family that is a very successful blended family, and they have been able to blend two families together very, very successfully. That shows that they're able to integrate people into the family. That shows that there's some flexibility there. People who have successfully parented children that may have some specific specialized needs. Now, I'm not saying that, we've got to consider a lot of factors with that. But, if we have a family that has demonstrated some success in navigating and dealing with some specialized needs that could tell us a lot about that family. Support is really critical as we are looking at and assessing families. We want people who have a broad existing support network. So what does their support network look like, and how might we find those? One of the things that we also want to make sure, and this was something I did a training at the OACA conference a couple of weeks ago, and I presented some of this material. And one of the things that one of the participants raised was, in addition to all of this, you need people who really like children. I said, yes, you do. And so she said, well, what about looking for people in places where we know that they are demonstrating some kind of commitment to children and, some success in interacting with children. So maybe people who are volunteering for, Big Brothers and Big Sisters, or people who volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club, or maybe scouting, or maybe volunteer with youth groups at their church, or that kind of stuff. So, so seeing people who are involved with things that require commitment on their part, and that have them connected and integrated into their communities in different ways are things that we can look for in our families. I think there's also, different professions and job types that might lend itself to being a successful treatment foster family. Not always. I'm not saying that like everybody who is a nurse is going to be a great foster family or foster parent, or everybody who's a social worker is going to be a great foster family. But if you have somebody in a profession that, where they're used to having to be flexible, having to think on their feet, having to, and they're showing and demonstrating some type of commitment to children or children and families, then there's some of the things that you already need there. So I think that those are some things that we can really look for. One of the other things that I like to, one of the other things that has always been interesting to me is people who have family members who have fostered, or people who have grown up in foster homes. So I think at the beginning of our discussion, Robert, I mentioned a family that ended up being very successful. And I was kind of, when the FDS was talking to me about this family, I was like, oh my gosh, how are we ever, they're like 21 years old. What are we ever going to do with this family? And they ended up, like I said, they ended up being one of the most successful families that we had during my tenure at the Sydney division. And the mom in that family, her parents had been foster parents, and so she grew up in a foster home. And so she had experience with people coming in and out of the family. She had experience with understanding trauma, even though she probably didn't grow up saying, oh, this kid is traumatized, I should have this understanding. But she had I think kind of you develop kind of an intuitive, as a child, you grew up in that situation, you develop some understanding for that, and that knowing not to take things personally. And so I know that we always talk about our best source of new foster families as existing foster families, but I think that there's really something to that, because you're getting people who may have similar qualities to families who are already successful, and they have some built-in support already when they come to the table. So, those are some things that kind of spoke, that I have thought about. How can we use this information? And I'm sure there's countless other ways. And, I would love to hear from other people who, have ideas as well. So I feel like I just went on a really long rambling, just really long rambling, gave a really long rambling answer there. So I don't know, Robert, does that answer your question?
No, definitely not a ramble. Definitely some very good quality information there. And to kind of speak to your previous foster children, or people that grew up in foster family homes already, they're tempered by fire already. It's the way that we kind of develop some of the leaders, as well as you got your book smart ones, and then you have ones that are trial by fire. Not necessarily the most effective way, but in this instance it is, because that's their norm. You're not
Right.
you're not throwing the surprises at them at the beginning that sometimes trips up our new foster families. They've already seen, done, and been through that, so they're more likely to kind of get through that initial growing phase and get right into the substantive, fostering of the youth. So no, definitely some great information there.
Right. Right.
I see by the fictional clock on our wall that we are running a little bit low on time, so we're going to wrap her up. But Kelly,
Okay.
I want to thank you personally for everything that you've done. On behalf of Safi, thank you for getting your doctorate, doing this research, and bringing it to our table so that we can kind of advance as an organization and hopefully change some things of the old school and get a little bit more modern in the training and development of that. For our SAFI staff out there that are looking for the successful foster family to bring into our network, what are some closing words or remarks or encouragements that you may have for them?
Oh, wow, that's really, I think that just kind of keeping in mind that there are things that we know that do lend themselves to success, and having those things in mind as we are recruiting and licensing and seeking to retain our families, having the kind of what we know already in mind, I think is really, really important. And I think kind of building on all of this, like I said, I would love to hear, what other ideas people have about, so, this is what we know, how can we translate that into effective recruiting and retention efforts? I would love to see the conversation kind of continue from here. And I always love to hear from other people. So, I think that we don't have a ton of information, but let's use what we have and use that information to guide us in the work that we do, and keep the conversation going.
And that's what it's all about. I mean, that's where the research comes from, is people taking the first step and then just continuing with the steps after that. Definitely. Party notes from me and that was parting. Sorry, I mumble, not party notes. Party notes from me as a former foster parent. When you're out there looking for those unicorns, those special families out there that really meet the criteria, make sure that your blinders are off. It may be that blended family that has 13 kids already and the dad has a purple mohawk. It may be that family that's only 21 years old, which I'm a little disappointed. We were 24, so they beat us by a couple years. It may not be what you as a person think as what's going to be the perfect foster family. Look at the qualities, look at the behaviors, look at what they bring to the table. Don't let the visual blinders kind of keep you from somebody that may be out there. But other than that, thank you guys for joining us. Kelly, again, thank you for joining us today. Great talk. I'm sure people are going to love this. We'll definitely have you back for more. But until then, Safi Land, we love you. Until we meet again, make sure to laugh, love, live, and most importantly, enjoy your moment of Zen.